We here on NNTV Sport features National Championship Off-Road Racing and a look at the AA Motorsport Diary. We kick off tonight with the Baberspan 500. This year the event was held over 500 kilometres, but as usual was in the Sunningshof area. The race catered for quads, motorbikes and cars and provided the spectators with plenty of action.
The Baberspan 500 in the maize fields of the Western Transvaal is always one of the highlights of the South African Off-Road Championship. This year the Baberspan formed the second round of the National Championship. Highlights of the Baberspan 500 are proudly brought to you by SVM, Toyota, Sani and Pro-M Electronics. Victory in the Rustenburg 400, the opening event of the season, gave Castrol Toyota dealer team pair Kasi Kutsia and Richard Leek an early lead in this year's production vehicle championship. Going into the Baberspan 500, they held a narrow lead over reigning champions Cliff Barker and Mike Redden in the Video Sport SVM Land Rover. The time-freight Nissan Sani pair of Neil Woolridge and Paul Vermaak were expected to put in a strong challenge, but ran into early problems.
Well, we started the time trial and we had a puncture about 3 k's out, so we stopped and we fixed that. And then we've lost power. It'll rev to about 3,500, 4,000 and it just stops, it just goes dead. We can't quite work it out. We've changed the management system, but it's still exactly the same. So we're not quite sure what to do at this stage.
After their win in the Rustenburg 400, Springboks Kasi Kutsia and Richard Leek were full of confidence in the Castrol Toyota Hilux Turbo. Springbok RP Reinicker, with wife Thelma doing the navigating in the Bankfin Toyota Land Cruiser, were also among the hot pre-race favourites. After a 50-kilometre time trial to determine start positions, there was the usual late-night activity in the pits. For reigning champions Cliff Barker and Mike Redden, race strategy was a simple matter.
Strategy, we're going to go. We're not going to play. As fast as we can.
Barker and Redden were first crew away, followed by Kutsia and Leek.
Well, I can take it calm. For the first 200 kilometers, the people opened the gates and taking the grass seats away in the road. And then the last 250 we can try to make up. And we should be in the front by this afternoon.
The competition in this year's production vehicle category is tougher than it's ever been. A tremendous battle was expected to develop between Castrol Toyota frontrunners Kutsia and Leek, the Reinicker husband and wife team in the Bankfin Toyota, and Barker and Redden, who desperately wanted to chalk up their first Baberspan victory. Barker and Redden were setting a cracking pace at the front of the production vehicle field, with Kutsia and Leek in hot pursuit in the Castrol Toyota Hilux. They in turn were being chased by RP Reinicker, who farms in the area and is a Baberspan specialist, and wife Thelma in the Bankfin Toyota Land Cruiser. Also involved in the early battle up front were Cecil and Michael Fincham in another Toyota Land Cruiser. Not far behind them, in a Land Cruiser of older vintage, were Jannie Visser and Johan Bester, who looked as though they'd settled into an early rhythm. Less than 50 kilometres from the start, the race was over for Kasi Kutsia and Richard Leek.
We seem to have a compression problem with the engine. It's blowing out oil, and it's not worth messing a good engine like this up, so unfortunately we're going to have to give this one a miss.
Cliff Barker and Mike Redden in the Video Sport SVM Land Rover were unaware of the drama behind them and were continuing to push as hard as they could. The radio link between RP Reinicker and wife Thelma in the navigator's hot seat had broken down, but Reinicker knows conditions on the Baberspan like the back of his hand. The Bankfin Toyota was slowly starting to put pressure on the leaders. Behind the leading pair, Jannie Visser and Johan Bester were a little more cautious, but were still going along steadily. The Baberspan is a long and grueling race, and Visser and Bester were intent on not putting too much stress on the aging Land Cruiser. In Class F, it was the Toyota Hilux of Niels Lemmer and Henry Kirstein that was setting the early pace, with some good battles developing throughout the field. Lemmer and Kirstein were being chased by Hein Grobler and Charles Wolmerans in another Toyota Hilux. Grobler and Wolmerans were also mixing caution with aggression and had moved to the front in Class G in the superbly turned out Hilux. As is always the case, the Baberspan provided a mixture between slow and flat-out sections. Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Buerter were slowly working their way through the field and were out in front in Class F in the Nissan. The Baberspan was run over 2 laps of around 250 kilometers, and first to arrive at the service point at the completion of lap 1 were Arpie and Thelma Reinicke in the Bankfin Toyota Land Cruiser. The Reinickes had moved ahead of the Video Sport SVM Land Rover in the hands of reigning SA champions Cliff Barker and Mike Redden. The Barker-Redden combination lost valuable time when they strayed off the route, with other top crews running into the same problem. Out in front, Arpie and Thelma Reinicke were slowly starting to take a tight grip on the race in the Bankfin Toyota Land Cruiser. After winning the production vehicle category with fellow Springbok Lucas Dreyer in last year's Baberspan, Reinicke was on course to make it 2 in a row on home territory. The Reinickes were still not able to communicate with each other via their helmet radios, but this was hardly a major problem. Behind the Reinickes, the Barker-Redden combination were pushing as hard as they could in the Video Sport SVM Land Rover. With the race decided on corrected time, the pair were forced to go for broke in an effort to try and catch Arpie and Thelma Reinicke, who were leading the race on the road. Jannie Visser and Johan Bester had also stepped up the pace in the older Land Cruiser, but were starting to come under pressure from Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Buerter in the Nissan Safari. They had a tight grip on the race, Arpie and Thelma Reinicke couldn't afford to relax. Where races are decided on corrected time, crews cannot lose concentration and coast along. Over a 500-kilometer course, it's almost impossible for teams to keep track of the opposition, and the only solution is to go as fast as you can for as long as you can. Cliff Barker and Mike Redden had taken up the challenge to try and catch the Reinickes on the road, but had their work cut out for them. Barker was starting to push the Land Rover to the limit. Both Barker and Redden were keen to beat the Reinickes in their own backyard, but time lost in the first of the 250-kilometer loops was a major disadvantage. The Jannie Visser-Johan Bester combination were third on the road and still going strong in the Land Cruiser. Still running strongly were Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Buerter in the Nissan Safari, which had lost its bonnet somewhere along the way. Van der Merwe and Buerter had taken a firm grip on Class F and on corrected time had moved ahead of Jannie Visser and Johan Bester. Also on a charge were Burley Arthur Abraham and Stratford Vogt in the Video Sport SVM Range Rover. The pair started in 50th position after running into fuel filter problems on the time trial, and were another crew forced to throw caution to the winds. The situation was still looking good for Arpie and Thelma Reinicke. With the Bankfin Toyota Land Cruiser running like clockwork, the pair were still first on the road, and on corrected time were maintaining the gap between themselves and Cliff Barker and Mike Redden. Barker and Redden were still pushing the Video Sport SVM Land Rover to the limit. Although matters were looking pretty relaxed in the cockpit of the Land Rover, Barker and Redden were in a go-for-broke situation. Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Buerter in the Nissan Safari had moved ahead of Jannie Visser and Johan Bester on the road. An impressive performance had put them into third place on corrected time, and they were way out in front in Class F. The Van der Merwe brothers, Hein and Wynand, dominated Class E in a Toyota Hilux, and there was further success for Toyota in Class G, with an impressive performance from Hein Grobler and Charles Wolmerans in another Toyota Hilux. There was bad luck for Arthur Abraham and Stratford Vogt in the Video Sport Range Rover. After working their way into the top 5, the pair picked up a 60-minute penalty for missing a control point and dropped back to 7th. The locals had plenty to celebrate when Arpie and Thelma Reinicke came storming home in the Bankfin Toyota Land Cruiser. The Baberspan 500 had once again proved to be a happy hunting ground for Reinicke. In the end, the Reinickes had nearly 25 minutes in hand over second place Cliff Barker and Mike Redden in the Video Sport SVM Land Rover. Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Buerter took third place in the Nissan Safari, with Jannie Visser and Johan Bester and the Van der Merwe brothers, Hein and Wynand, rounding out the top 5.
Thelma did quite well today because
we were only gone for about 10 k's from the start, and our Odo went. So we did the whole race without the Odo, and about 150 k's out, the intercom system also packed up, and then she had to shout at me, and that's all things that you lose your, first when a thing like that happens, you lose your concentration for 5 or 10 minutes, and until you get used to it, and then you gain that concentration to concentrate on the race.
A win in the Rustenburg 400 saw Richard Manning leading the 200 class in the motorcycle category going into the Baberspan 500. Manning took overall honours in last year's Baberspan, but this time was upstaged by Henny Human on the Lesotho Office Equipment Honda, who produced a tremendous performance to finish 4th overall and take the 200 class honours. With Alfie Cox competing in Europe, the 250 class was wide open, with Darryl Curtis and Graham McLaughlin leading contenders at Baberspan. Curtis and McLaughlin had to take a back seat to Springbok Errol Dalton, who took overall honours on the Schumwils Yamaha. There was tragedy for 500 class leader Yuri Human at the Baberspan. Human scored his first ever national championship win in the Rustenburg 400 and was well on the way to a second successive victory when he crashed and broke his leg. With Human taken to hospital, it was Rian van Niekerk who took class honours and 7th overall. Christo van der Merwe and local hero Vickers van Deventer shared the lead in the quad championship after the Rustenburg 400. Van Deventer won last year's Baberspan, but was later excluded from the results for a technical infringement. This time out, he made no mistake with another impressive performance. After one event in the special vehicle category, Stan Illman and Frans Stangl topped the championship standings ahead of Port Elizabeth crew Greg Harvey and Lionel Acton, with Wade Perrins and Derek Frankenberg in 3rd place. The competition is also tough in the special vehicle class, with Richard Schilling and Ashley Thorne adding to the interest with the debut of the new Motortech Raceco imported from the United States.
Look, if it's wet weather, we've got another set of tyres, a special kind of compound in that, but when you come to Baberspan, you've got to be prepared for those type of things. It wouldn't worry us too much. Certainly it'll help the 4x4s a bit, but the space frames will be there.
The Sulwald brothers, Herman and Karl Heinz, are the reigning South African special vehicle champions and were among the pre-race favourites. The pair were in impressive form in the 50-kilometre time trial in the Sulwald Transport Raceco, fitted with a Rover V8 engine.
The car is very nice. We're testing new tyres in front, Michelin tyres, and they work quite well. We're quite happy with it. The handling of the car is much improved from last year.
There were problems after the time trial for Marius and Margie Bourain, with technical crew working late into the night to change the gearbox on the Toyota Raceco.
You have to take it easy, I think, in this game, otherwise I think you'd end yourself in trouble. You break the car.
Rustenburg 400 winners Stan Illman and Frans Stangl were also full of confidence, with the Baberspan maintaining the off-road tradition of early morning starts.
Well, today I think it's a long day, we're going to take it easy. We've got a reasonably good starting position. There's going to be a lot of dust, and hopefully the wind will blow a little bit. But I reckon if we take it easy, we're in a good chance. We messed up Rustenburg, so we must try and keep this one together.
The father and son team of Frans Chepek Sr. and Frans Jr. were also among the pre-race favourites, with Richard Schilling and Ashley Thorne unknown quantities in the Motortech Raceco, which was having its first outing. Where Herman and Karl-Heinz Sulwald are concerned, there are no frills to off-road racing. The two brothers are spectacular performers, and it was both speed and consistency that took them to the South African Championship last season. Stan Illman and Frans Stangl got their season off to a flying start when they won the Rustenburg 400. The pair are motorsport stalwarts, and a year or two ago competed in the London to Sydney Marathon in a Porsche. They took a little time to settle down at Baberspan, and a slight miscalculation cost them a few seconds early on in the race. The special vehicle category also being decided on corrected time, little mistakes like that can prove costly. It was still early in the race, but Illman and Stangl were already coming under pressure from Richard Schilling and Ashley Thorne in the Motortech Raceco, which incorporates all the latest technology from the United States. The Chepek father and son team were not far behind Schilling and Thorne in the V-Motors Raceco. The Chepeks looked to be sticking to a game plan, calling for a cautious start. There's nothing cautious where veteran Linton Draper's concerned, and he and Peter Smith were chasing after the Chepeks in the awesome Draper Excavator hire Raceco. Crew in a hurry were Nardus Alberts and Peter Mattia in the Rapsa Raceco. The pair have not had much luck in recent races and were looking for a good result. Also going along steadily were Nick Harper and Richard Hill in the Pro-Am Electronics Raceco. Port Elizabeth crew Greg Harvey and Lionel Acton were having another steady run in the Queen's Motor Spares Raceco, with Botswana pair JJ Volmerantz and Steve Cooper the surprise package in the race, hot on their heels in another Raceco. Youngsters Craig Draper and Robin Houghton were also on a charge in the Draper Excavator hire Raceco, with Max Moore going along steadily at the front of Class B in the VW Panzerwagen. Moore was being chased by Richard Carolyn in the Lubrication Equipment Raceco, with Carolyn the first of the single-seater runner. The cars generated plenty of interest among the local youngsters, with John Rowe, with rally driver Tony Ball doing the navigating, starting to work his way through the field. While the Natal crew were steadily going about their business, Stan Illman and Franz Stangl had overtaken the Sulwald brothers to be first on the road. The pair were now into their stride and starting to take a grip on the race. A tremendous battle had developed between the Chepeks and Richard Schilling and Ashley Thorne. The Motortech Raceco had closed right up on the V-Motors car, with Schilling and Thorne starting to look for a way past. The Motortech entry was showing plenty of potential on its first outing. Both the Chepeks and Schilling and Thorne had moved ahead of the Sulwald brothers, who were battling to make up lost ground. The chase was on, and the Sulwalds had thrown caution to the winds and were going like the clappers. It was spectacular stuff. The Sulwalds got on with the business of chasing the Chepeks and the Motortech car. Linton Draper and Peter Smith were having a good run in the Draper Excavator hire Raceco, which in the past had often suffered from reliability problems. There was no hint of any problems this time out, but not far behind the Draper-Smith combination were Nick Harper and Richard Hill in the Pro-Am Electronics Raceco. A good dice had also developed between Botswana pair JJ Volmerantz and Steve Cooper, who'd moved ahead of Greg Harvey and Lionel Acton from the Eastern Cape. While the two crews indulged in their little personal battle, Max Moore was still going strong at the front of Class B in the Panzerwagen. Like Moore up ahead of him, Richard Carolyn in the single-seater Lubrication Equipment Raceco was having to both drive and navigate, but was doing a pretty good job of it. Carolyn was being chased by Natal crew John Rowe and Tony Ball, who lost a few seconds when they ran into temporary difficulties with the route schedule. Behind Rowe and Ball, the second Draper Excavator hire car in the hands of Craig Draper and Robin Houghton was still going well, with the race developing into an intriguing contest. The father and daughter combination of Niels and Carla Eriksson in the VW Beetle were also going along steadily. They decided discretion was the better part of valor when confronted by a small donga. The Erikssons were being chased by another off-road veteran, Harry Roscoe, in the Protea Playing Cards Raceco. Roscoe's also not had much luck in recent events and was another who was hoping for a good result. Running at the back of the Class A field in an aging Orco, Jaco Smit and Johan Flock politely waved Roscoe through when the single-seater Raceco appeared out of nowhere. Roscoe was later to retire after crashing head-on into Max Moore's Panzerwagen. Back at the service area at the end of the first of the two 250-kilometre loops that made up the course, there was plenty of frantic activity as one by one the cars appeared on the scene to take on petrol. More often than not, some quick running repairs were also needed. The Sulwalt brothers had lost valuable time on the first leg and were keen to get back into the fray as quickly as possible. The Sulwalts were back in action just as Linton Draper and Peter Smith appeared on the scene. The Draper entry was closely followed by JJ Volmerans and Steve Cooper, who were going like a train and were suddenly in contention for overall honours.
Yeah, it's fine. It's a flat out dice between Schilling and myself. But he started showing off a bit back there and he took out the gate post.
Here comes the man with your drinks. He comes us.
He's complaining.
As with any form of motor racing, crews like to get in and out of the service area as quickly as possible. Time wasted in the pits has to be made up out on the course, and the result of a race often hinges on how much time teams spent in the service area. Out on the course, the Sulwalt brothers were out to make up for time lost on the first leg. Wet patches were few and far between on this year's Baberspan, with the race the driest for many seasons. After running at the front of the field for long periods, Stan Illman and Frans Stangl were slowly but surely losing ground in the Carrera Motors raceco. The Porsche motor powering the raceco was starting to sound a little rough, but there was nothing a frustrated Illman and Stangl could do but soldier on as best they could. The Illman-Stangl car was rapidly being hauled in by Linton Draper and Peter Smith, who were having a tremendous run. Draper and Smith were never out of the top 10, but there were occasions when Draper was forced to curb his natural tendency to race flat out all the time. With no windscreen, the wet patches also provided a bit of a problem for both driver and navigator when it comes to visibility. JJ Volmerans and Steve Cooper don't often encounter wet conditions in Botswana. Apart from making traction difficult, the wet and muddy sections often play havoc with a car's electrical system. Volmerans and Cooper also treated the wet patches with respect, but it was an impressive performance by the pair, who were smooth and consistent throughout the race. Nick Harper and Richard Hill were still going along steadily in the Pro-Am Electronics raceco. On corrected time, the pair were also holding down a place in the top 10 in a car in which Richard Schilling and Ashley Thorne previously raced with tremendous success. Frans Chepek Sr. and Jr. were also progressing smoothly in the V-Motors raceco and were aiming at a top 5 finish. Draper and Robin Houghton were desperately trying to force themselves into the top 10 and were involved in a terrific scrap with Wade Perrins and Derek Frankenberg in the Lalette Sandmaster. Little battles like this had developed throughout the field, with Perrins and Frankenberg also trying to haul in Class B leader Craig Hopkinson. Scything their way through the field were the brother and sister team of Marius and Margie Borain in the Toyota Raceco. The pair started almost at the back of the field after running into a gearbox problem in the time trial. They borrowed a spare gearbox from Nardus Albert and then set about some serious racing. Crews like the Sulwalt brothers made it to the finish ahead of Borain and his sister, who were 13th on the road. The Borains finished the race on 3 wheels and on corrected time were declared the winners and immediately found themselves in the middle of a controversy. A protest was lodged against the Borains on the grounds that they didn't clock into the overnight impound area prior to the race. This carries a time penalty and the results are provisional, pending an appeal hearing by AA Motorsport, the controlling body for motorsport in South Africa. Highlights of the Baberspan 500 were proudly brought to you by SVM, Toyota, Sani and Pro-Am Electronics.